Hiring managers of Reddit. What's your favorite "they were perfect until we googled them" story? This kid, early 20s, comes in for a job. Seemed normal enough. Google him and he was wanted in another state for stabbing a street burner to death. I share my dad's name, so when you Google my name you pull up his exploits. Stuff like being arrested for having 7 semi-trucks worth of weed in his driveway. Thanks, Dad. Hiring private tutors to work with middle school students. Had a great conversation with a girl. She stressed how much she wants to be a role model for young girls. Basically exactly what we were looking for. Then I googled her and the first picture on her Facebook is her doing a line. I was interviewing a chef for my business. The interview went great, and he had an excellent resume. Worked at some of the top restaurants in the world. 3 Michelin star type places. Even did a short cooking test with some spare ribs and they were incredible. There was some stiff competition though, so eventually we decided to look at everyone's Facebook profiles. One of his old profile pics was him at a Mardi Gras parade dressed as Pikachu with a big dildo strapped on. He got the job. Everything looked good on her resume. She was very professional and enthusiastic in her interview and just had that thing. That self-starter attitude that made you feel like this girl is going to get it done. Well, ran a background check and literally nothing checked out. She was not actually licensed in her field like she claimed and she had about a dozen priors for various white-collar crimes and none of her work history or references checked out. I guess she was just hoping that her charisma would win us over and that we wouldn't bother checking up on her. Really nice. Clean-cut young man from the nearby college applies in my shop. Sweet, friendly, outgoing and smart. He was perfect. Until we googled him. He had a last name that was the same as a girl I had gone to school with. So I googled his name. Found his Facebook and discovered that he was actually her little brother. I immediately called my friend, his sister, and said, "Hey, your brother just applied in my shop. I'm gonna hire him." She said, "Sweet. Free ice cream." So he was perfect until I googled him. And then he was even better. He worked for me for 2 years and was a delight. I was a restaurant manager and the owner hired this guy as a chef without doing basic research, which he did a few times. Anyways, the guy said he had won several awards and worked with celebrities, etc. The guy was a total D to everyone on staff. I decided to Google him. First hit is a mugshot from a drug arrest, then more articles. One about where he lied about getting a James Beard award from a previous restaurant he worked at. A comment about him owing $25,000 or something to his former boss. The only positive restaurant review he had was from 1990. I came in after the weekend to show my boss this stuff. When I learned he was fired the night before for exposing himself to one of the waitresses. I wasn't the hiring manager but my teammate was. A candidate came through that he and some other members interviewed and seemed pretty okay for the job until they checked her out. Turns out she was suing the company. Yes, the one she applied for a job for, so my teammate ended up not hiring her. I was interviewing a much older guy for a similar position of mine. Everything seemed okay, and he was our best candidate. Before moving forward, I did a quick Google search to only find out that he was fired from his previous job because of stealing $5,000 worth of computer equipment. I direct hired him anyway. Pre-Google era, but I think it fits the question. Family owned a trucking company. Literally everyone in my immediate family has or had a CDL. Mom's turn to take the newbie for a road test pre-hire. During the road test, they were involved in an accident. They were hit while stopped. The company was based out of Indiana. Accident happened in Illinois. Newbie gets arrested on the spot. Come to find out he has warrants that hadn't been out long enough for the background check service we used to get them yet. One of the warrants, stalking a female dispatcher from the previous trucking company he worked for. Edit. For clarity, the warrants were from Illinois. Had a guy apply for an entry-level post with us recently. His CV was okay, so we offered him an interview. Social media seemed okay too. He never turned up for the interview. A couple of weeks later, there's a story about him in the local paper. Turned out that he was living at the local boarding house and was found in the kitchen one morning totally wasted, wearing nothing but a pair of socks. When a couple of women who also lived there tried to escort him back to his room, he got violent and assaulted them. Given the date stated in the paper, he didn't turn up because he'd been in jail at the time of the interview. His resume has now been added to the do not touch with a 10-foot barge pole section in our filing cabinet. Had a guy come in to apply for a dump truck job. Seemed okay. Very well spoken. Clean cut. Not the type you usually see applying for a job driving a dump truck. He told me he had a PhD in psychology. Had his own DWR addiction counseling business, but his wife divorced him and he lost everything. So I googled him. He wasn't lying. But the story goes much deeper. Turns out his wife was cheating on him. When he found out where the boyfriend lived, he snorted almost enough coke to give himself a heart attack and went to his house, where his wife's car was parked. He shot 30 rounds from an AR-15 into the house and the car with them inside the house. Somehow he got off with only 6 months in jail and probation. I can post links to news articles if anyone is interested. He didn't get the job. I was hiring for our late night shifts ending at 2 and 3 am, and she was willing to work anything and looking for about 25 hours per week. This was absolutely what the company was looking for. She had mentioned that she was grieving her little boy who passed 2 weeks ago and needed to do something to occupy her time. She finished her 1 day of computer training and stopped showing up. Later in the week she sent me an email stating that she wasn't ready to come back to work like she'd thought, which was understandable. My assistant manager and I decided to look her up, only to find that she had multiple GoFundMe pages set up for her sob story with different amounts of time that the supposed child had been dead for. Her Facebook was full of selfies and party photos. She ended up asking for the job back a few months later and we shot her down pretty quick. Edit. I've recently googled her name and found that all the GoFundMe pages have been taken down and her social media profiles deleted, privatized. The story took place early last year. Somewhat the reverse. I was shocked by a guy who was running his own startup and looking for talent in my specific field. I liked the look of his company. His business model seemed viable. Salary was competitive and he offered equity. I was bored with my current position, so it was tempting. Out of curiosity I googled him and his email he contacted me through. His name was really common. Thinking maybe he's used it to register anywhere else. His startup had no Glassdoor profile. I found a bunch of posts by him on a South Africa forum that were really racist against black people. He used the N-word at least once and was really aggressive. I declined the offer and linked him what I found that sealed my decision. He responded back saying he wished I'd reconsider, that those comments were somebody else. He used his LinkedIn profile photo for his avatar. Edit. Because I've got someone could be pretending to be him a dozen times now. He registered on the site with the email he contacted me with. That's how I found him. I thought that was clear, but I suppose not. Always look up your potential employers, kids. Not Google, but was pretty decent till I ran a background check. The guy had multiple misdemeanors for possession, selling, distribution of multiple illegal weapons. My favorite including, yes you guessed it, a cane sword. We were narrowing the group down to 2-3 candidates. We then Google FB LinkedIn them and get to one that was in the top 2. Their FB was completely open to the public to view everything. Lots of racist, sexist comments. Risque photos of them with some slight nudity. Was too bad. Their resume was quite good, just not something we would consider appropriate. Okay, not a hiring manager, but at the time, I was a makeup artist that was flying to NY to work with a photographer. Right before the trip, communication dropped off completely. He wouldn't respond to Instagram or calls or emails. A few weeks later, happened to catch his name in the paper. He had been arrested for planning and filming the abuse of a toddler. I noticed on his resume that he claimed to be a graduate of the Yale School of Music. When I asked his thoughts about Woolsey Hall, Yale's main concert hall, and its famous pipe organ, prominently on display, front and center, he obviously had no idea what I was referring to. He had never heard of Woolsey Hall. Edit. I've related the above in the past in response to a similar AskReddit question. Where I work, they hired a guy who was great at the job and a nice, quiet employee. His background check took forever to clear for some reason, but it ultimately came back clean. Eventually he said he needed to take a day off for court. but he just never came back after that day. Upon looking into it, he had been found guilty of sexual misconduct with a minor, 2 counts. That must have been why it took so long to come back. They were unsure if it should be reported since it was pending. Sigh. I hired a girl. She interviewed well. First day she threw up some red flags, but I figured I was misjudging or misinterpreting. People start missing money and one of my belongings disappears, which had never happened prior to her hiring. She was insulting everyone and making customers uncomfortable and I wanted her gone. Less than 4 full weeks from her start date, but didn't want to pay unemployment. Finally do a search arrest records in multiple states involving domestic violence and theft. She ended up saying she could just rape one of my barely legal employees, so I fired her for sexual harassment. Lesson learned. Check everyone out no matter how well they interview. I used to manage a group home for developmentally disabled adults. I was in charge of hiring the staff that we needed to make the house run properly. I saw a name come across my desk that I had to interview and I instantly looked them up. Turns out, this was a girl that had an obsessive crush on me from years ago, and on her social media, she still did. I was in a panic, because she was basically stalking everything I did, and I really couldn't back out because it was 5 minutes before the interview. She came in, and it was so weird. She acted normal. We interviewed in a professional manner for about 15 minutes, showed her around, and I thought, whoa, maybe she has done some maturing and just let it go. Then we got back to my office. I started a sentence like, well, name, it's been a pleasure having you here and oh, no, we aren't done yet. You think you can ignore everything like you don't know what's going on? I know where you work. Now, I know where you live, and I'm going to keep calling. There was more she was saying along the lines of me telling her to kindly leave, but a phone call to the police, as well as a restraining order, kept her away from work and my life. My full name is the same full name of 2 NFL players. One even has the same middle initial as I do. Seemed like a nice young man. Very polite, hard-working and quiet. Didn't find out until other employees complained that he had dodged a murder rap by reason of insanity and was recently deemed fit to rejoin society. Apparently the case was a pretty high-profile one as well. His contract was not renewed. Edit spelling correction. Second edit, grammar correction. I'm not a hiring manager, but they did duck up and hired the guy. I worked for a newspaper and they hired a new director for my department. About a year after I left the company, the newspaper's reporters were writing a story about this guy because he was trying to open a coffee shop. The reporters found out that he had murdered his girlfriend and dumped her body in Lake Michigan, then went to prison for it. The company never did a background check on him. He got fired. Happened earlier this week. Near perfect resume. Guy has quite relevant experience up until about 4 years ago, and has been trying to get his own startup off the ground since then. It's not working out. No big deal. Most don't, so he's looking for another job. Of course, I go and Google his startup. It's complete and utter bullet. He's been trying to get people to invest in the equivalent of a perpetual motion machine. Not that, but similarly fanciful concept of another type. No wonder he couldn't get any investment or traction of any other type. So yeah, hard pass. I know this may not be totally relevant here, but there was a time I was screening tenant applications for a room for rent. I had a bad roommate experience before and wanted to make sure I got the right fit for a tenant. I was exchanging emails with this nice lady who was eager to move. I explained to her the process and that a background check was needed to be done by our property manager. But I had this weird gut feeling about this lady, so I googled her name and a bunch of arrest records popped up, including domestic disputes. That was a no for me and politely declined her application. I'm not a hiring manager, but I had 3 job interviews with a company for a decently well-paid position. They said that the second interview was the final interview. It seems as though they waited to Google me until right before offering me a position, because after the second interview, I got a final phone call in which the hiring manager started the conversation by quoting my character in a movie that I was in. He laughed. I nervously chuckled. As it turns out, I'm a working actor that wanted a flexible day job. He then asked me if I'd jump ship if I booked a series regular on a TV show. I said yes. He laughed. I didn't. I ended up taking the job and got called by my characters' names for the first 6 months. Edit. I got it, folks. I've edited for clarification. A little different, but a story that always entertains me. I worked for a staffing agency. Guy is hired and comes in for background and drug screen. He has lots of priors, but he was working in a kitchen, so we got the okay to continue the process. It wasn't until the drug screen that he gets a little nervous. I tell them that we are going to do a drug screen now, and he asks to put it off till Monday. Typically, we'd have to do it that day so they could start work, but this was like 4:45 on a Friday and we wanted to go home, so we said yes. Monday rolls around and he shows up. He takes the test and it comes up positive for weed, sugar, and some other stuff. We told him that we test multiple things and that sugar also showed up. We asked him if that was a surprise. He told us I do dabble in sugar, but I thought this was a test for weed. We politely said that we couldn't hire him. There are so many weird stories from working at a staffing agency. The guy who was fired from the police department because he extorted $6 in exchange for pushing applications through for the police academy. A cousin of mine was training for a manager's position and sat in on an interview with a woman who applied for a secretary position for his boss. He immediately recognized her as a webcam girl he was into a couple of years before. About 6 months after she was hired, she was involved in an affair with my cousin's boss, owner of the smallish company. Last I knew, she married the boss, got pregnant, then they divorced, all within about 4 months. I have story from the other side of the desk. When I showed up for my interview, the hiring manager was not there. I was told he was out sick, but I could interview with his backup. Halfway through the interview, the office starts buzzing with activity. Whispers of an emergency were circulating and the sick manager's name is part of the emergency. We wrapped up the interview early and I went home. Later that day I googled his name. He wasn't sick. He had turned himself in that morning for shooting killing his baby's mother. The bullet also grazed the baby but didn't cause serious injury. I got the job. Edit. Link to a news article about the murder. Tangentially related. I rent out a couple of rooms in my house. On occasion I'll see people in local subreddits asking about finding a room for rent. Pro tip: if you're using your Reddit account to look for a room for rent, avoid keeping the following types of posts in your post history, responding primarily to NSFW porn posts, especially if you're posting lots of creeper messages. I don't care if you're gay, but posting Reddit personals for daily random hookups as a power bottom doesn't make for a good roommate. My front door isn't revolving. If reading your post history feels like a guide on how to be an asshole, you should probably rethink your behavior. I tried googling a software developer I was interviewing, but he had such a generic name I couldn't track him down. When he mentioned that a recent career break was to stand in a local government election, we found a semi-public Facebook feed full of racist and anti-Semitic posts. These included photoshopped pictures of Angela Merkel in a Nazi uniform and posts encouraging people not to eat at foreign muck Indian takeaways. There were several local news articles highlighting his horrible racist social media activity. He was also quoted as saying, "When I get elected and I'm in power, I'll show them." Worst of all was the news article containing his unsolicited abusive rant at the mother of kidnapped child Madeleine McCann. Slightly off topic but relevant. I heard we'd hired a new guy and so I looked him up on LinkedIn. Turns out he was just leaving a job where my father-in-law worked. I sent Pops a text and asked him about the new hire and opinions on him, and didn't get an answer. When I went for dinner the following weekend, I asked again. Turns out this new hire said he was leaving his former job to go and take care of his ailing mother in Africa. His former company said to not worry about it, take an unpaid leave, and come back when you can, however long it takes. I went in on Monday and told my boss. He didn't fire him immediately, but when he didn't perform well in his job after a couple of months, he got canned, and then proceeded to go back to his former company and tell them he was back from Africa. They did not rehire him.